Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you here. And welcome to our continued journey through the book of Revelation. Today, we are blessed to have Tom May with us. It's going to help us sort of get into some of the visual imagery that attends Revelation. A couple things I think we want to bring to everyone's attention, particularly as we move into these chapters here, chapters 4, 5, and 6. In the beginning, John says that he was caught up in the Spirit. So that should let us know what he is seeing here is a vision. These are visionary images that he is having. Okay, so that should tell us right then that the imagination is at work. And this is not to be taken absolutely literally, but that in the spirit, the imagination, and God is working through John, giving him these images of what it is to be in the throne of heaven and what he sees. Also, John mentions there in the first chapter, blessed is the one who not only reads the book of prophecy, but also hears the book of prophecy. So, with that said, there are Bibles on the tables, and I am going to ask Sam to read chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, so we can again hear what it is to be entering the throne of heaven.
Chapter.
Chapter 4.
After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing, and those are the 7 spirits of God. Also, in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second was like an ox, and the third had a face like a man, and the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive the glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being."
It's creepy. That could be considered creepy, frightening, mind altering. Again, this is a vision, right? He is in the spirit seeing this, and the invitation, come up here, come up to the throne room of heaven, and let me show you what I see. Bill, you just had the Bible open. If you could read chapter 5 for us. Reopen the book. Crack the scroll, if you will.
Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or to look inside. Then one of the elders said, turn page. To me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, saying, You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne, and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength, and to honor and glory and praise. Then I heard every creature in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and on the sea, and all that is in them, saying, To him who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb, be praised and honor and glory and power, forever and ever. The 4 living creatures said, Amen, and the elders fell down and worshipped.
Here's our liturgy. Right? Some of those words we say every Sunday, every time we have Eucharist. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, right? Let us join with heaven and with angels and archangels. Sherry, if you could read for us chapter 6, and then we'll turn it over to Tom.
I would request, don't read farther than verse 8,
No further than verse 8.
up through the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Right. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, Come. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, Come. And another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, Come. I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, Come. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. So what I've done is tried to I think I'm okay. Can you hear me sufficiently? I've tried to, I embarked on this as something of a naive, having no idea of how extensive the presence and how very present the book of Revelation is in the whole history of not only Western European art, but also within the Orthodox tradition, with really interesting differences there, where the emphasis, for example, on the resurrection is much more of a community rising. Jesus, in other words, harrowing of hell, and Jesus leading a whole group of people on the way to his resurrection. So I mean, they're very, very interesting differences. But what I tried to do was to choose art from different media. And I ultimately resolved on three major sources, and and with adding a fourth. But the three that I chose turn out to be within the 15th century, at the beginning of the century, at the and more towards two at the beginning, namely the great east window of York Minster Cathedral, and also the Ghent altarpiece, also known as the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, in terms of what we've just been reading, and also then, most tellingly, perhaps in terms of its influence subsequently, Albrecht Dürer, the great, if you will, the Northern Leonardo, as he was thought of, in his famous 15 images called, and text, the Apocalypse in pictures. So and then finally I come into the 20th century with one that I discovered that was just mind-blowing. So in any event, this is not me. This is just I guess I should say, this is not I. This is simply a kind of acknowledgement of what the kind of thing that most people think of when they hear the word apocalyptic. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. When you, and this you saw last week, but I'll just remind you, the Isle of Patmos, right here, off the western coast of what today is Turkey, with the 7 churches that we talked about a little last week, is right here. And the most, if you will, it's part of a whole set of islands which aren't pictured here, called the Dodecanese, and of which the most famous and the largest is the island of Rhodes. Probably heard of the Colossus of Rhodes, which of course is no longer there, but nevertheless, it's a very important island. And Patmos, which is a place of pilgrimage. My wife and I, when we were talking about pilgrimages last week, this was one of the places that I remember visiting. And if we could go to the next slide, Winship, please. This is the mosaic dating from around the 11th century that is over the entrance to the Cave of the Apocalypse. And you can see the Greek writing here. This is a kind of abbreviation of Holy John. And then over here, you can sort of make out, if you know any Greek, Theologos, the theologian. So it's very clear that in the Orthodox tradition, John the divine, John the evangelist, they're all a single person. We talked last week about how it seems, no, we're talking about a tradition, and we're talking perhaps about an author named John who was in that Johannine tradition. But it's, I think, really interesting because he's receiving the message, and you see these strokes up here. This is the voice of God. It's just a sort of part of an orb and lines with a hand right here that's looking, and John is looking up, and he's gesturing to Prochorus, who is considered a saint in the Orthodox tradition, who's his scribe taking this down. Okay, it's a really, and it really, in a very sort of appropriate, simplified way, gives you an idea of what the geology of Patmos is. It's very rocky, and it's surmounted by this enormous fortress from a lot of it from the Ottoman period. But the cage of the cave of the apocalypse is really an amazing place to visit. Okay, next, please. Okay, this is a picture, a painting from our National Gallery of Art in Washington. Some of you may have seen it. It's by Tiziano Vecellio, or more commonly known as Titian, the way most of us don't think of Leonardo da Vinci. We talk about Leonardo, or in Britain sometimes, Leonard. But in any event, it's a really amazing picture. I hope it's kind of, because of there's too much light in this room, but if you look closely, you can see Titian, this dates from around 1553 or so. And look at what he's done. Just think of the mosaic you just looked at. And look here we have a kind of quintessential high Renaissance God surrounded with angels. And again, the rays, just as there were in the, at least faintly, in the mosaic. It's much brighter, so you've got to go to Patmos. But what's really wonderful, I think, and of course, look, it's very clear that Titian is also thinking, this is John the Evangelist. And here's the eagle. And of course, the eagle is an appropriate symbol for John because of the four, if you will, creatures that are inherited from the prophet Ezekiel, and if you will, repurposed, reinterpreted in Christianity, because the eagle soars the highest. And so if John is at once the most theological gospel, and the eagle is the bird that can soar the highest, then it's appropriate. It's like the eagle lectern that we have in the church. So there he is. And the other thing that I think is really wonderful is he uses he's put him on sort of a mountaintop, which could be the case at Patmos. And he also is using the whole technique of foreshortening. In other words, rather than having him standing the way in which he does in the mosaic, rather flat, not only do we see the contours of his body, but we're looking up at John. Titian is making us look up, and he's using this very dramatic foreshortening, this posture that he's taking, almost as he's at once of awe and being overwhelmed just by the weight of what he's hearing. So it's really, I think, a marvelous painting, and you've got to go see it. And it's on a ceiling. And if you go in the right way, you're going to experience it. It was originally painted for the Scuola di San Giovanni Battista in Venice. And then they decided they wanted to put something else there. And so some Italian noble family owned it, a Venetian family, for a while. And then finally they sold it to the National Gallery of Art in the 50s, and we're the lucky beneficiaries. So next slide, please. Now for something completely different. This is the great east window of York Minster, which is just an amazing composition of about 331 panels. And beginning with the heavens, this figure here is God the Father. I know it just looks like a colored blur here. This whole area right here is what is given of the Old Testament, going from Genesis to here, the death of Absalom, David's favorite son. And then that's it for the Old Testament. And then this here and here, down to all but the last row, the bottom row, the one that's most visible, is the book of Revelation. Every one of these panels depicts some image or passage from the book of Revelation. And the wonderful thing is you can go online, and if you're obsessive like me, you can go through every single one. They're just amazing. So, and just as a diagram to prove, next slide, please, Winship. Whoops. Yes, there we go. You gave me two. So here you have God the Father in the company of heaven, the Old Testament scenes, the apocalypse cycle, all this purple. And then, which amounts to about 81 panels. And then the bottom, which includes the donor, a bishop by the name of Skirlaw, who was the Bishop of Durham, a Palatinate bishop, very powerful, very rich. And he gave this window to York Minster. And the other thing I would mention about this period is that it is a period that is fraught. This is done in 3 years, from 1405 to 1408. Those of you who are fans of British history should know that this is during the reign of Richard II, whom you at least might know from Shakespeare and the great Henriade of Richard II, Henry IV, 1 and 2, and Henry V. But I think what's really important is, in terms of York has just gone through an attack of the Black Death. Remember that the Black Death emerges in 1349. It continues intermittently through into the 18th century. And it continues to this day, actually, in some places. But so they've gotten, and York is itself rather poor at this point, but it's an archbishopric, second only to Canterbury. And yet this enormous the Minster, York Minster, is the largest of the cathedrals in Britain. And then it is filled with stained glass that has survived all the vagaries of history. And that would be a whole other story, and I won't get into that. But in any event, so here it is. And the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is, those of you medieval history buffs, is at the end of the previous century, the 14th, the one in which the Black Death emerges, we have the unfortunate Great Schism, where there are 3 popes, each of whom excommunicates the followers of the others. Thank God they didn't have Instagram in those days. Just imagine. I mean, Christianity might have simply evaporated, because there hadn't been a Reformation either or anything like that. I mean, people didn't read the Bible unless they were, literate, and for the most part, clerics or scholars. So it's a very, and finally, Richard II has sort of imposed among the 2 contenders a man named Scrope and Skirlaw of Durham. He's back Scrope as who's called Scrope in Shakespeare. And Scrope leads a rebellion against Richard and is imprisoned, tried, imprisoned, and beheaded. All of this has happened while this window is in the offing, which is really, just think of that. Think of the kind of faith that is there. It's just amazing, isn't it? Think of what we're going through now. All we're wondering about is what's next. What's next for the dean and chapter? What's this window? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here we have John's commission that we read about in Revelation 1. This is a panel. And you'll notice here are the candlesticks of the 4 churches. Notice here are the 7 stars. Here is the 2-edged sword that comes from his mouth. All right. He changes the color of his sash from gold in the text to blue here, but he changes this later on. And I should say, and this is really important, the artist who's responsible for this great scheme is a man named John Thornton, who's from Coventry. He did the windows at Coventry too, and unfortunately they were destroyed during the bombings during the Second World War. They stored them away, but not carefully enough, and they were gone. York was hit by too, but the Minster survived. And we see John with this amazing expression on his face. And but more, we should move on. Next slide, please, Winship. Here is contrast. This is the image, the second image in Albrecht Dürer's Apocalypse with pictures. And this is John's vision, his version of John's vision of the seven candlesticks. Very different medium, obviously, not stained glass, no color. And this is a faint, really, impression compared to being able to look at the actual book. The National Gallery has a copy, one of the copies of the book, which was published in 1498 and then reissued in 1511. And it was published both in Latin and in German. And it's very interesting too, because this is before there's been any kind of official sanction by the church to for an authorized version in any vernacular language. So Dürer is doing this, and of course, it's on its way to 1517 and the Theses at Wittenberg and Luther and so on. And where Dürer stood, it's clear that he was very sympathetic to the need for reform, but whether he was actually a follower of Luther is something that people argue about. But in any event, just to look at what he does. First of all, look at his signature, AD, Anno Domini, Albrecht Dürer. So it's a really, and this is true of just about all of his art, whether it's painting or whether it's engravings. This is a woodcut. It's probably the apogee of that medium. Taking pear wood, making a drawing, taking pear wood and very carefully cutting to the right depth and the right thickness all of the nuances that you see here. And what do you notice about these candlesticks? Just look closely. Just look at them. They represent what? The seven churches. Right. Well, are all the seven churches the same? It seems not from the text, right? So what does he do? Look at what he does with the candlesticks. Each one is different from the other. And yet they're all, of course, lit. And one, I don't know which church this is supposed to be, has a wavering flame, or it's being moved. So, I mean, this is just Dürer at his best. And look at the way he presents John. Winship, could we go back to the previous slide just for a moment, please? Yeah. Okay, here's John here. We get to see his face, and we get to see that very sort of anxious, awe-filled, whatever. Thornton was famous for his painting, and that's his role, was to paint so many of the faces of these figures, these probably thousands of figures that are in these great windows. Okay, back to Dürer. The next slide again, please. Whereas here, look at what Dürer does. He has him completely, his face is something we don't get to see. So instead, it's just his posture, which is so, and despite all of the clothes, the vesture that he's wearing, we get this an amazing sense of the body that's beneath it all. And that's Durer's, his drawing is just amazing, I think. And here's God, again, with this, look what he does with the sword. And it turns out, in his case, it's a long sword. A long sword is a battle sword, double-edged and cruciform, and was sometimes called, in its own time, the hand and a half sword. And then, yeah. Hand and a half. In other words, you couldn't hold it just with one hand. It's too heavy. But it wasn't so that the handle was not so long that you couldn't, that you could use two full hands.
Fire.
Yes.
And as a kid, this really frightened me.
Yes.
Those fiery eyes, in fact, eyes in Revelation really were very scary to me.
Back of the head. Yeah.
Back in the
But look also, he's holding a book, which would seem to be the book ultimately that John is meant to write. But John has to take it down. Okay, let's go back. Next slide. Okay, there we go. Okay, and there we have, if you will, this image of back at on the York window. We have where he says, this is 5:1. I saw a scroll in the right hand of the one who sat on the throne. So notice the similarity and close repetition of the elements of the previous slide from York. But here, instead of the altar setting with candlesticks, the figure of God, that is for the York window, the figure of God is seated on a golden throne. And he's enclosed in this almond-shaped figure called a mandorla. Mandorla literally means almond, and of course it's almond-shaped. Okay, and which also gives an aureole of golden light that is like the light emanating from God. And he holds in his right hand, as we saw in the Dur, a book, a sealed book, not a scroll, but a sealed book with the Lamb, with its, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself now here. The Lamb has its right leg on the book. And surrounded by then, here are the four living creatures, all right, which we think of course, Matthew, John, Mark, and Luke, the ox, and the lion, the eagle, and the one like a man, here depicted as an angel. Okay, and just look at all of the detail of, we get the throne is rather simple. It looks almost again like an altar. It's golden though. And then with his feet hanging over the mandorla that he's in. And then, with all of these too, there are all these really interesting, we would think of these as sort of typical medieval, almost like gargoyle-like figures that are around the frame of each one of these. Okay. And this is a glorious setting then that evokes the hymns of praise that we just heard raised and that we'll probably hear more about next week. I mean, really hear. So, okay, next, please. Yeah. It does. And would you go back just for a moment, wouldn't you? It does. And I think, okay, so you have 5, I guess, that are clearly visible here. And I'm not sure, in another one of the images, and they vary through this, there'll be another seal that's hanging over the other side of the book or whatever, I'm sure. And by the way, I should add also that every one of these images would have had to have been approved by the dean and chapter of the cathedral. You know, they didn't just say to John Thompson, well, go to it. And just think of that. Just think of having to do that in this diocese. In any event, I'll stop there. In any event, let's go to the next. Yeah, the bishop is coming. The bishop is coming. Okay, here is the Ghent altarpiece, which is painted at over a period from the 1420s to 1432. So just after, you can imagine the magnitude of these endeavors. York is doing the stained glass window in chaotic time. And similarly, in Ghent, this is for not what is at the time not even a cathedral. This is St. Bavo's is where this still is now, but is one of the parish churches in Ghent. Imagine this in St. Anne's, you know? I mean, it's just immense. And so, but it's so much more than what we've seen so far. You know, it has 2 registers, and this is just the front. These 4 panels on either side have paintings on the back as well, so that this could be closed. And those subjects, which included the Annunciation and so on, could be seen. And also, of course, the donors, husband and wife. They were really rich. One of them had been the mayor of Ghent. And then this would be opened on great feast days. You can imagine the effect. But here we have God, the Father. We have Mary, and we have John the Baptist. In the passage that we read this morning, if you recall, the talk was about music. And here we have singers, and here we have instrumentalists. This probably St. Cecilia at the organ. I mean, they're really marvelous. And just as an aside, St. John's uses this, a very unprepossessing black and white version of it, as the cover to its anthology of music that the freshmen have to learn. I had nothing to do with that, at least with the picture. But in any event, and then, of course, Adam and Eve. And then we have all sorts of others here in the lower panels that look like the military and other people. But what I really want us to focus on next is this. This is what would be called the ray table. It's right at the level of the altar. And we have to imagine that, and what we see here, well, tell me what you see. Isn't this amazing? But try to decode it, you Christians. Yeah, the lamb is on the... It what? It looks pagan. Well, what do you make of this? Right. And if we could see things more closely, there are other angels. There are all these angels around it. And they are holding the other instruments of the Passion. You can sort of see, here you see the pillar at which Christ was scourged. Okay? But yeah, it's arresting, I think, because it's a mixture of what seems to be the very real, and then all the rich symbology of the Apocalypse text. it is, and so just to enumerate, okay. So you have to imagine also what its liturgical function was. So imagine when the priest, after the elements have been consecrated and he elevated them, he's facing this and he's raising it so that it's right in line with this. Can you guess what this is about? Yeah, the fountain of life that's talked about through the Apocalypse in various places, and just beneath the Lamb. So it's a very, very carefully considered and imagined image. And you just if you were a native citizen of Ghent, or today a savvy tourist, you might begin to be distracted too by all of these buildings. And it turns out there are real correlates for them, not only in Ghent, but also in the Netherlands. So that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, please, Bev. Pardon? That is an aureole around. Can you see what this is right there? A dove. So why?
Just does.
The dove.
Yeah, I'm not.
Well, in the Holy Spirit. You think of the account of the baptism of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. The Spirit in the form of a dove appears. So there it is. And so it's going to be right under, remember what the upper register was: God, the Spirit, and the Lamb. So there's a Trinity.
I will ask the people's question. Who would have understood this at the time? Was it, I mean, if you go back to the stained glass window, it's very complex.
That's right.
Who would have actually understood it? Would the people that went there to worship have understood it?
Only if it were used as, if it were talked about
Instruction.
in preaching.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
or some kind of instruction.
Okay.
But this is, okay, 15th century, we have, at least among a certain middle class, a higher level of literacy, obviously. But, the amazing thing about York is York, the town of York, was probably mostly hovels. And then here is this immense minster, largest cathedral in Britain, one of the largest in Europe, except maybe for Sevilla. So it's just amazing. But just to say we have angels here sensing the altar. Outdoors, no fear of the fire department. I had to put that in. But in any event, the other thing is, why is it outside? Why is it outside? Spoiler alert, where do we end up at the end of Revelation? At the very end, the New Jerusalem. What's really interesting, I think, is that this is a depiction, among others, of so many things, but it would seem of the New Jerusalem. And in the Middle Ages, particularly during the great period of cathedral building, because John has a vision of the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And so the great cathedrals, Notre Dame, Chartres, York Minster, the other cathedrals in England, I can't imagine thinking of St. Paul's really as the New Jerusalem. But in any event, the old St. Paul's, perhaps, that might have been the imagination. But, yeah, so it's really, and it's really the adoration of the mystic lamb. This is what all those songs are about. Next slide, please, Winship. And just another close up. Here, it's hard to read this, but it says, Agnus Dei qui tollis peccatum mundi, Lamb of God that takest away the sins of the world. And look, next slide. The lamb that was slain, and here the blood goes into the chalice. So, by the way, I think that this is something that everyone who came to St. Bavo's would have immediately understood. And this is what the whole thing is all about for the faith of those people. And just one more, Winship, if you would. Yes, this has been going through about an 18-year restoration, because this is the most stolen work of art in Europe. You've all seen the Monuments Men. This was the great treasure, along with almost 6,000 other paintings in a salt mine in Austria. And which actually wasn't too bad, because at least it was dry, you know? And but what happened over the years was overpainting, restoration. And so the whole process has been removing that. And suddenly, look at the face that emerges. The eyes are penetrating. They're human. You know, it's just, and the aureole around the lamb is that much. So it's just, we haven't gotten to Ghent yet, but it's worth a trip across the ocean to see this, I'm sure.
Tom, just
Yeah.
the one on the left looks male and the one on the right looks female. Do you see that?
Do you all see that?
The one on the left looks male and the one on the right looks female to me.
You'd have to say more. Is it because it looks more compassionate, more sensitive?
The eyes, the lips, the neck, everything's
Yeah,
very different to me, but
it is. But you know, the mouth is, having seen lambs, that's pretty. Pardon? That's a good question. I mean, just that ray table. So let's see. I do have the dimensions of the whole. I thought I did. No, I meant to. It's about, you know, all of the panels in length, in width, are about I think 14 feet, and then it's about yeah. Okay, thank you. 17. The whole altarpiece. Yeah. So this is the focus of the whole altarpiece, both theologically and just in terms of composition. Okay. So it's really, really rich. I'd strongly recommend, by the way, YouTube is a great resource for looking at this. And there are short and long, there are many. Similarly with the Great East Window of York and the other stained glass at York. But we're really blessed with that because the color is good, the sound is good, and so on. Okay, I would mention a book that I found of immense help. It's published by Oxford. It's called Picturing the Apocalypse, and it's by Natasha and Anthony O'Hear. And it's considered to be one of the finest books written about the apocalypse itself. And it really, you know, gives you a kind of synopsis of history, and also talks about music that the apocalypse has inspired as well. Okay, let's move on, because I realize it's It's 12:30 and I feel like Cinderella. And you might too. Okay. And this is, okay, here we see we just read the passage in book 5 or chapter 5, but no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll. I shed many tears. It's one of the most poignant moments, I think, in the first part of the first chapters of the Apocalypse. And here we see John, there he is wrestling, as it were, with the possibility of whether he can open it or not. And here you are. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it looks like maybe on the other side of the Lamb, there might be another scroll that has enabled the Lamb to open the book. And it's very interesting, isn't it, that Thompson, the artist, and all the people that he's accountable to have agreed to let it be a book and not a scroll. Books are real. The Codex book is so important, and it really is coterminous with really the Bible, the way the Bible was published, as opposed to scrolls, which is where the Hebrew scriptures were always published, were repeated, I should. And now, also remember, 15th century, we're in the age of books. You can, if you want, buy a very inexpensive but small version of the Apocalypse with pictures of Albrecht Dürer, which will really let you look long and lingeringly at them and at their, but bear in mind that the actual book is like this. And the National Gallery and the Walters Museum both have copies. And at least in the case of the National Gallery, probably too in terms of the Walters, they will let you, if you make an appointment, go see it. They also have single sheets of, but here, back with this, yeah, this one, look at these faces. And one is holding a harp. It's really, and these are, if you count them, they're 12. We talked about the importance of the numbers 7 and 12 all through. 7, perfection, 12, apostleship. And through that, as we heard in the sermon today, we're meant to go out and do something. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, and the Lamb broke open the first. So the Lamb is the seal breaker and opens the first of the 7 seals, and a white horse and its rider come out. So that, I think, is, and it specifies the colors that are associated with them, which Dürer cannot do. Of course, he has to do it with whatever it is that they're holding. And so there's a white horse and its rider. And note the use of red surrounding the lamb and the vesture of the rider. And also the rider is crowned, so a kingly figure, and is also riding this, and also the red on all the halters and stock of the horse. And there's also this statement, he rode forth victorious to further his victories. And on that basis, I think of that line, this is seen as the horse of the figure of conquest. Okay. Next slide, please. Dürer does something very different. This is probably one of the most influential images repeated numerous times of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse. And here is the figure we just saw, okay? Conquest, then this one with a sword, and boy, this is really, if you will, a long sword. And then this one with carrying scales. And what's that about? Anyone? I feel like I'm in Ferris Bueller. Anyone? Anyone? Weighing. What do you weigh?
Justice.
Well, yeah,
No, I
that's
was thinking of weighing the scales as
right. Sure, using it
justice.
symbolically. But what would you use it really for? What do you use it for in the grocery store? Food. Exactly. That's right. Wheat and barley. And they're even mentioned in the text. But of course, we moderns, postmoderns, which is even worse, just skip over things like that. You know, how many of us use scales in the grocery store? Not many. I do too. In any event, so yeah, but look what's happening. It's, okay, it's a nice day in Nuremberg, really nice weather, but all hell is breaking loose. And then finally, this figure. Okay, so we have conquest, war, famine. He doesn't look famished, but look at the people under him. And then this fellow is death. But what's really interesting, Durer doesn't make him a skeleton or something like that. He makes him this famished figure on a famished nag. But curiouser and curiouser, Alice said, look, who's right here? Can you see what's happening there? It's the figure here is wearing a mitre. And we have this monster swallowing this hierarch. And then we have all of these others that are just in the way of this whole period. So we get the four horsemen here.
Tom, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Are you familiar with the four horsemen on Roosevelt, the Supreme Court during Roosevelt's New Deal? Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it.
Okay, I was just wondering what you thought. The four horsemen are the four Supreme Court justices that kept striking down Roosevelt's New Deal. But what do you think of those kind of applications? Is it minimize the meaning? It's obviously not the apocalypse, but
no, but I think it's a really good example of how the imagery of the apocalypse is adapted to all manner of, and it's not as if, you see, it's not as if this isn't political, right? Because it's looking at its own time. And it's not as, and this goes in terms of, if we think of sculpture, cathedral tympana, that is the great west doors, rather than the east end, the west doors, invariably show the Last Judgment. And when you look at who's there on the left, the sinister's hand of Jesus, invariably you see clergy. And, if we had all the world in time, I can show you that in the great east window, there's a wonderful one that shows a pope and a king, and then ordinary people down to serfs going into the mouth of hell. There are two judgments, spoiler alert, that go on in the apocalypse. Okay, but there are just two more, I think, images, because I know we're running over time and you're being very patient. I would even say indulgent. This is a Russian version. It's too bad Johann isn't here. He's been reading War and Peace. This is a Russian, Viktor Mikhailovich Vasnetsov, his version of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which is more, I think, almost movie-like, right? We would think of, or it's certainly getting into modern, even though it's 19th century. And yeah, still, if you will, sort of, actually, this is more like a broadsword, but then this is a more conventional depiction of death on a pale horse. Okay, and again, just the melee beneath it. Here, not bishops, but at least a king, it seems, has been slain. Okay, now the next. And this is really different. This is Max Beckmann's from a book that a project. Beckmann was, and this is to show, he's a German expressionist painter of the 20th century, born in the late 19th century, who did all kinds of things in trying to become the artist that he did become. He ultimately, though, was denounced as a degenerate artist by the Nazis, the so-called Entartung, the degenerate sorts. And there was a big exhibit that Hitler and Goebbels and everybody else went to, and his were among the paintings that were condemned. And so he leaves Germany for the Netherlands. Bad choice. Then he's in occupied Amsterdam. And this is a note from his diary. Worked on Apocalypse. This is in the 14th of December in 1941. Worked on the Apocalypse, dark Sunday. And so having been ostracized as a degenerate artist, and he's living in a self-imposed exile in Amsterdam, he had already lived through the agonies at the beginning of the century of the First World War, the so-called Great War, where he was tending the wounded and saw just the horrors of that war. You know, over 8 million slain in the course of it. And he was commissioned by a German owner of a printing operation in Frankfurt, Germany, to do this. And so he agrees to do it, and it comes out in a limited edition of 24 copies, because from 25 or more, it would come under the survey of the censors. And this was the only way. And we're fortunate enough at the National Gallery of Art to have one of those copies, and it was the one that was owned by his widow. And she gave it to the National Gallery of Art. And this is a photograph that I took of this page. I made an appointment and went over, and just look at, whether or not you know what expressionism means, just look at this in contrast to the Batsasov or Dürer in terms of emotion, and then adding this flame. You know, so I am the viewer looking out and see this. You know, I think it so richly expresses the place of anyone who finds him or herself caught in a maelstrom, whatever the issue is that provokes it, where one feels alarmed and threatened. And here is a book next to the candle, and look at the sky and the way he presents it, and we can try to figure out what this is here that he's depicting, but we see in this figure really ominous. And it's really interesting because Beckmann loses his faith altogether as a result of what he went through and saw in the First World War. He was very celebrated as an artist during the Weimar Republic, that brief period of attempted democracy in Germany, but then Hitler becomes chancellor and everything changes. I'll stop there. I won't make another comment. You can read my mind. But in any event, he finds his faith again. And this is done with, as far as I can tell, Luther's translation of the book, Luther Melanchthon's translation of the book of Revelation is on facing pages to the images in Beckmann's Apocalypse. And then finally, and this is the last slide, but it's, for me, the most personally moving. This is his image for in the last chapter, and God shall wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there's going to be no more mourning, and so on. And so here's this angel, godlike figure. And here is Beckmann, like Rembrandt and Picasso, did numerous self-portraits of himself. And if you know his self-portraits, you realize this and all, like, because he was bald, he had these piercing eyes. You can look him up on Google him. It's he. So he puts himself, it seems, it's very likely, puts himself as the one who looks in hope and in faith despite everything at that. And I think that that's where, and then we have, if you will, the sun and a star, new heaven and a new earth. So with that.
Is the angel or the godlike figure is white? Is that?
Are you going to close out?
You can. It's very feminine.
Yes, I know. Very, yeah, very compassionate figure. The other thing that I wondered too about this is, what are Jews having to wear? Now, Beckmann is not a Jew, but what are Jews having to wear? Yeah, and you've got all of the, this very distinctive, sometimes garb. Yeah, so it's really, I think, really powerful. And to his consideration of, and he was really driven. This is over a period of about 2 years doing this project. And then what's really interesting, he comes to America after the war. He goes to St. Louis. St. Louis holds the biggest collection, Beckmann's paintings and so on. And there are many in Europe now as well, but it's the St. Louis Art Museum, and but the National Gallery has this, and it also has many, almost 1,000 pages of drawings that he did. I mean, a lot of them are really strange sketches and so on. They're fascinating. You can look at them online. Unfortunately, actually, you can look at a fair amount of this. I didn't realize this until yesterday, but it was really wonderful to go and hold the book and spend a couple of hours, just looking at that and Dürer a couple of months ago. When I started this, it's very powerful. And so I would finally, just a recommendation, a couple of things. There are many, as we know, YouTube has everything, and some of it's really good and some of it isn't. But if you were to go on YouTube and simply to type in The Great East Window, Brian Clark, and it's part of a series called Heni, H-E-N-I, lectures. And it's 14 minutes long. And more than any image that I showed you, or any photograph, it's actually walking into York Minster and seeing, if you go in from either one of the transept entrances or from the West Front and go in, you realize it's almost a pilgrimage to get to the Great East Window. And the speaker, whose name is Brian Clark, is an architectural artist and talks about his first experience as a Brit living the next county over, I guess, coming to York Minster as a child, and it just changing his life in terms of what he ended up doing and everything else. And he said, we walked into this cathedral and we heard this glorious polyphony, and you hear the polyphony and then just see this phantasmagoria of stained glass. It's the greatest collection of stained glass in England, because so much was destroyed either by war or during the dissolution of the monasteries, the iconoclasm of the English civil wars in the 17th century. St. Anne's owes the simplicity of its iconography, I think, very much to that same impulse, worrying about the early commandments and making images and so on. It's clear that at York, at one point they weren't. And during the Civil Wars, there was even an order by the Roundhead, the Roundhead general, who had been a citizen of York, to his artillery, don't dare go anywhere near the minster. And so there it is. And likewise at Canterbury, so much of the shrine of St. Thomas, of course, is long gone. But so it's really, it's really, and these images, obviously, from what Joe's question, the images of the apocalypse are with us and haunt us still. And I hope this helps as we go through. Thank you. Thank you.